Time to check your pantry. There's a recall of certain black beans and chili beans nationwide, with some sold in Hawaii.
What if I told you that right now, sitting in your pantry, there could be canned beans that pose serious health risks to you and your family? We're not talking about minor issues here. We're talking about dangers that have led to hospitalizations, massive recalls, and in some cases, life-threatening situations. Today, you're going to learn exactly what to avoid and what you can actually trust. Before we get into the specific problems, you need to understand something important. Canned beans are supposed to be one of the safest, most convenient foods you can buy. They're shelf-stable, affordable, packed with protein and fiber. But not all cans are created equal. The food safety system has gaps, and those gaps have real consequences. When a can of beans goes wrong, it can go very wrong. The Centers for Disease Control, the FDA, and the USDA all have strict regulations for canned foods, especially low-acid foods like beans, but regulations only work when they're actually followed, when cans are inspected properly, when storage conditions are right, and sometimes those things just don't happen. Number 5 is critical because most people never even think to check for this. You need to avoid any can that shows physical damage, and I mean cans that are bulging, leaking, badly dented, especially near the seams, rusted through, or cans that spurt or hiss when you open them. This isn't about being picky. These are the classic warning signs of a loss of container integrity, which is a fancy way of saying possible botulism contamination. Clostridium botulinum is the bacteria that causes botulism, and it's one of the most dangerous foodborne threats that exists. This bacteria produces a neurotoxin that you cannot see, smell, or taste. According to the CDC, even a small taste of contaminated food can be deadly, and that's not an exaggeration. Botulism attacks your nervous system and can cause paralysis, respiratory failure, death. Low-acid canned foods like beans are regulated under Title 21 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 113, specifically because of this botulism risk. When a can's seal fails during processing or gets damaged after manufacturing, it creates an environment where these spores can germinate and produce toxin. Here's how to spot these danger signs quickly. Stand the can on a flat surface and roll it, and if the ends are bulging, the can won't sit flat, it'll wobble. Inspect the top and bottom seams carefully, and check the side seams too, because deep dents at seams are extremely high risk, since they can compromise the hermetic seal that keeps microorganisms out. Check for rust, especially around the seams. When you open a can, watch for spurting liquid or unusual pressure, any kind of hissing sound, or off odors, and if any of these things happen, stop immediately. Don't taste it to check. The USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service uses almost this exact language in their consumer guidance: double bag the can and throw it away. Why do seam dents matter so much? Because that's where the can is sealed. A deep dent can create a tiny channel that breaks the airtight seal, and once air or bacteria get in, you've lost the safety factor that makes canned food shelf-stable in the first place. Beans have a pH above 4.6, which makes them low-acid. High-acid foods like tomatoes are safer because the acid itself inhibits bacterial growth, but beans don't have that natural protection, which is why the canning process has to achieve what's called commercial sterility through high heat and pressure. When you see a damaged can, you're looking at a container where that sterility might be compromised. The bottom line here is simple. If a can shows any of these warning signs, do not eat it. The USDA's motto for questionable canned goods is, when in doubt, throw it out. And that's exactly what you should do. This isn't about wasting food, it's about not gambling with botulism. Number 4 on our list is home canned beans, or artisanal market beans, when you cannot verify that they were pressure canned under safe conditions. This is high risk for the same reason we just discussed, botulism. Beans are a low-acid food with a pH greater than 4.6, and to safely can low-acid foods, You absolutely must use a pressure canner that can reach high enough temperatures to kill botulinum spores. Water bath canning, which works fine for high-acid foods like pickles and jams, is not safe for beans because it simply doesn't get hot enough. Most foodborne botulism outbreaks in the United States stem from improperly home-canned low-acid foods, and this is documented by the CDC in their botulism surveillance data. When someone uses a water bath canner for green beans or tries to can beans without following proper pressure and time guidelines, they're creating a potentially lethal product. Now you might be thinking, what about the beans I buy at the grocery store? Commercial canned beans are manufactured under the FDA's low-acid canned foods regulations, specifically Title 21 CFR Parts 108 and 113, and these are some of the strictest food safety rules that exist. Commercial canners have to register with the FDA, file their process schedules, maintain detailed records, and follow very specific thermal processing requirements. But even with all those rules, problems can occasionally occur. In 2008, there was an institutional canned bean recall related to botulism risk involving a processing failure at a commercial facility. This kind of thing is rare in the commercial sector precisely because the regulations are so strict, but it shows why the rules exist and why your own can inspection habits still matter. There's also a side issue worth mentioning about kidney beans specifically, though it's separate from canning safety. Raw or undercooked red kidney beans contain a natural compound called phytohemagglutinin, which is a type of lectin, and if dried kidney beans are cooked improperly, especially if they're prepared in a slow cooker that doesn't reach a high enough temperature, this lectin can cause severe nausea and vomiting within a few hours. However, commercially canned kidney beans are completely safe because they've been pressure cooked during the canning process, which destroys the lectin. This is only a concern if you're cooking dried beans from scratch and don't boil them vigorously before putting them in a slow cooker. But back to the main point about canning safety. If you cannot verify that artisan or home canned beans were pressure canned using proper time, temperature, and pressure for the bean variety and jar size, you should not eat them. With commercial cans from the grocery store, you're protected by federal regulations, but you should still inspect every can for the damage signs we talked about in number 5, because safety is about layers of protection, and visual inspection is your final check. Number 3 is cans that have been exposed to heat extremes, freezing conditions, or flood water. So we need to break down why each of these matters. First, heat exposure. Canned goods are shelf-stable, but that doesn't mean they're indestructible. When cans are stored in hot locations like garages in summer, cars, or cabinets above the stove, the quality deteriorates much faster, and more importantly, extreme heat can actually cause cans to buckle or compromise seals over time. The USDA advises storing shelf-stable cans in a cool, dry place for good reason. Low-acid canned items like beans maintain their best quality for 2 to 5 years when stored properly at room temperature. And beyond that window, it's not that they suddenly become toxic, but quality degrades. And if there's been any seal compromise that you can't see, the safety margin decreases. High heat accelerates all of these processes. Freezing presents a different problem. When canned food freezes, the contents expand, and this expansion can cause the can to bulge or buckle the seams. Once a seam is damaged, even if it looks minor, you've potentially broken that hermetic seal. After the food thaws, you might have a can that looks mostly normal but has microscopic channels where contamination could occur during storage. Now, floodwater exposure comes up after hurricanes, floods, and other disasters. Floodwater is contaminated with sewage, chemicals, bacteria, and all kinds of hazardous materials. When floodwater touches canned goods, it can seep into microscopic spaces around the seal or contaminate the outside of the can. The CDC and USDA both provide specific guidance on this. After a flood, You should discard any food that has come in contact with floodwater unless it's in a completely undamaged, commercially sealed metal can that you can properly sanitize. The sanitization process involves removing the label, washing the can in soapy water, immersing it in a solution of 1 tablespoon of unscented liquid chlorine bleach per gallon of water for 15 minutes, then air drying before opening. Most people don't do this correctly, and honestly, most cans that go through floods have some damage, so the safest approach is usually disposal. There's also the issue of what happens after you open a can, because once opened, the contents are no longer shelf-stable. You need to transfer beans to a clean glass or plastic container, refrigerate them promptly, and use them within 3 to 4 days, or you can freeze them for longer storage. This isn't just about quality, it's about safety. Leaving opened cans of beans in the refrigerator can lead to metallic taste and faster spoilage. The metal of the can can react with the food once it's been exposed to air, and while this isn't usually dangerous, it degrades quality rapidly. More importantly, if opened canned food sits at room temperature for more than 2 hours, or 1 hour if the room is above 90 degrees, bacterial growth becomes a real concern. So the bottom line for number 3 is this. Store your unopened cans in a cool, dry place, ideally between 50 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Avoid temperature extremes. Never let cans freeze. If cans have been through a flood, follow CDC sanitization procedures exactly if the cans are undamaged. Otherwise, throw them away. And once you open a can, treat the contents as a perishable food and handle accordingly. Number 2 focuses on sweetened canned beans, the kind you find labeled as baked beans, barbecue beans, or other sweet and savory varieties. Now, this isn't about immediate safety in the way that botulism is. This is about nutrition and the long-term health impacts of consuming products with excessive added sugar and sodium. But the reason this makes the avoid list is because these products can seriously undermine your health goals while being marketed as a wholesome, convenient food. Many canned baked beans or barbecue-style beans are loaded with added sugars. You might see sugar, molasses, brown sugar, corn syrup, or multiple sweeteners in the ingredients list. A typical serving, which is about half a cup, can contain around 12 grams of added sugar, and that's roughly 3 teaspoons of sugar in a side dish. The dietary guidelines for Americans, which are updated every 5 years by the USDA and Department of Health and Human Services, recommend limiting added sugars to less than 10% of your total daily calories. For someone eating 2,000 calories per day, that works out to about 50 grams of added sugar maximum for the whole day, but many people's actual healthy limit is lower than that. If you eat a half cup of sweet baked beans, you've just used up almost a quarter of your daily added sugar budget on a side dish. If you eat a full cup, which is not uncommon, you're looking at closer to 20 grams of total sugars and roughly 870 milligrams of sodium. These figures come from USDA Food Data Central, which is the government's official nutrient database. The numbers vary by brand and recipe, but they illustrate the ballpark you're dealing with. That sodium figure deserves attention too. The American Heart Association recommends no more than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day, with an ideal target of 1,500 milligrams for most adults, particularly those with high blood pressure. When 1 cup of beans delivers 870 milligrams of sodium, you can see how quickly daily intake adds up. Why does excess added sugar matter? It's linked to increased risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and fatty liver disease. The dietary guidelines emphasize cutting added sugar as one of the most effective ways to improve overall dietary quality. With sodium, high intake is associated with increased blood pressure and cardiovascular disease risk. The reason these sweetened beans are on the avoid list isn't that they'll make you sick if you eat them once. It's that if they become a pantry staple, if you're feeding them to your family regularly, you're incorporating a significant source of added sugar and sodium into your routine diet, and that has cumulative health effects. Here's the better approach. If you really love the flavor of baked beans, look for lower sugar versions and compare labels in the store because some brands have started offering reduced sugar options. Or buy no salt added plain beans and make your own quick sauce at home. You can use tomato paste, a small amount of molasses or maple syrup, vinegar, mustard, garlic, and onion to create a sweet and savory flavor while controlling exactly how much sugar and salt goes in. This way, you get the taste you want without the nutritional downsides. The bottom line is that for routine meals, those sweet and saucy beans should be treats, not staples. If you have them occasionally at a cookout or as a special side dish, that's fine, but don't stock them as your go-to bean option. Now we arrive at number 1, and this is about something you have complete control over. Avoid high-sodium regular beans when low-sodium or no-salt added options are available, especially if you're not planning to drain and rinse them. Sodium is the quiet problem in canned foods, and beans are a prime example. A standard can of beans, whether black beans, pinto beans, kidney beans, or chickpeas, often contains somewhere between 300 and 500 milligrams of sodium per half-cup serving. Over the course of a day, if you're eating canned beans at lunch and canned soup, or other high-sodium convenience foods at dinner, you can easily exceed the recommended limits. As we mentioned before, the FDA's daily value for sodium is 2,300 milligrams, and the American Heart Association recommends an ideal limit of 1,500 milligrams per day for most adults. Many Americans consume far more than this, and the excess comes largely from processed and packaged foods, not from the salt shaker. High sodium intake is a major contributor to high blood pressure, which in turn increases risk for heart disease and stroke, and these are the leading causes of death in the United States. Reducing sodium intake is one of the most evidence-based dietary changes you can make for cardiovascular health. Now here's the good news. You have options. The FDA regulates the terms that manufacturers can use on labels when they make sodium claims, and understanding these definitions helps you shop smarter. Low sodium means 140 milligrams or less per serving. Very low sodium means 35 milligrams or less per serving. Sodium-free means less than 5 milligrams per serving. Reduced sodium means at least 25% less sodium than the regular product, but be careful here because reduced doesn't necessarily mean low. If the original product had 600 milligrams and the reduced sodium version has 450, that's still a lot of sodium per serving. No salt added or unsalted means that no salt was added during processing, but the food can still contain naturally occurring sodium. For beans, which don't have much natural sodium, no salt added versions typically have very low sodium content, often around 10 milligrams per serving. These label definitions come from Title 21 CFR, Section 101.61 of the federal regulations. When you're at the store, start checking these labels and comparing. Pick up a regular can of black beans and a no-salt added can of black beans from the same brand, and read the nutrition facts panel. You'll see a dramatic difference in the sodium line. The regular might say 460 milligrams. The no-salt added might say 10 milligrams, and that's a reduction of 450 milligrams per serving. If you eat beans a few times a week, making that switch adds up to a really significant reduction in your weekly sodium intake. But what if you already have regular beans at home, or the store is out of the low-sodium kind? There's a simple kitchen solution that works really well, and that's draining and rinsing your beans. Research done at the University of Tennessee and presented at the Institute of Food Technologists has shown that draining canned beans reduces sodium by about 36% on average, and draining and then rinsing them under running water reduces sodium by about 41%. Similar reductions have been seen across various canned vegetables in USDA-linked research. This is a meaningful reduction. When you're choosing products, look at the nutrition facts panel to confirm the sodium is 140 milligrams per serving or lower, which qualifies as low sodium, or look for the no salt added label, which will usually result in even less. Some brands also label their cans as BPA-free or BPA non-intent, which refers to the lining inside the can. There's been a lot of discussion about BPA, which stands for bisphenol A, a chemical that was widely used in can linings and has raised concerns because it can leach into food and has hormone-disrupting properties. The FDA's current position as of April 2023 is that BPA is safe at current levels in foods from approved uses. However, the European Food Safety Authority took a different stance. In 2023, EFSA dramatically lowered the tolerable daily intake of BPA, and the European Union subsequently adopted a regulation that prohibits BPA in food contact materials, including can coatings. This regulation became effective in January 2025, with transition periods for industry compliance. In the United States, the can manufacturing industry has largely moved away from BPA-based linings anyway. According to trade reports and independent analyses, approximately 90 to 95% of food cans in the U.S. now use non-BPA linings such as acrylics, polyesters, or olefin polymers. This shift happened voluntarily in response to consumer concerns. There is a caveat, though. Some of the BPA replacement chemicals, like BPS and BPF, have shown endocrine activity in laboratory and epidemiologic studies, and the real-world risk at dietary levels is still being researched and debated. If you want to take a cautious approach, especially during pregnancy or for young children, choosing products specifically labeled as BPA non-intent or BPA-free, or choosing beans packed in aseptic cartons instead of metal cans is a reasonable personal choice. You can also reduce any potential exposure by not heating foods in the cans themselves, so always transfer the food to a pot or microwave-safe dish before heating. Now, how do you use these no-salt-added beans to make them taste great? It's easy. Drain and rinse them even though they're already low sodium, because rinsing improves texture and flavor. Then, season them however you like. Toss them into salads, fold them into tacos or burritos, simmer them with aromatics like garlic, onions, and spices for a quick side dish, or blend them with olive oil, lemon juice, and garlic to make a quick bean dip or spread. You control the seasoning, which means you can make them as flavorful as you want without the sodium overload. The bottom line is this: no salt-added beans in water are nutritious, versatile, and safe. They give you total control over sodium while preserving all the fiber, protein, and minerals that make beans such a valuable food. The second type of bean you can confidently keep in your pantry is canned lentils and canned chickpeas packed in water, drained and rinsed well before you use them. And these are especially helpful if you're sensitive to FODMAPs, which are certain types of carbohydrates that can cause digestive issues for people with irritable bowel syndrome. Canned lentils and chickpeas are fully cooked, convenient, and nutritious. They offer similar benefits to other canned beans in terms of protein, fiber, iron, potassium, and magnesium. But there's a specific advantage for people who have trouble digesting beans: the oligosaccharides that cause gas and bloating, which are a type of FODMAP, leach into the canning liquid during processing. When you drain and rinse canned chickpeas or lentils, you wash away a significant portion of these compounds, making the beans more tolerable for sensitive digestive systems. Monash University in Australia, which is the leading research institution for the low FODMAP diet, specifically notes in their app and guidance materials that rinsed canned chickpeas and rinsed canned lentils can be eaten in small portions, typically around a quarter to a half cup, depending on the individual and the specific legume, by people following a low FODMAP diet. And this is precisely because of the leaching effect during canning. If you cooked the same amount of dried lentils or chickpeas from scratch, they would contain much more of the gas-producing oligosaccharides and would likely trigger more symptoms. From a nutrition standpoint, you still get meaningful amounts of protein and fiber, even in these smaller portions, plus the minerals that beans provide. And because lentils and chickpeas are relatively mild in flavor, they adapt well to bold seasonings. You can toss them into curries, chili, salsa verde, lemon garlic dressings, or Mediterranean-inspired dishes without them overpowering other flavors. For chickpeas specifically, one popular use is to rinse them, pat them dry, toss them with a little oil and spices, and roast them in the oven until they're crispy, which makes a crunchy, protein-rich snack or salad topping. With lentils, you can stir them into sautéed onions, garlic, and tomatoes with cumin and coriander for a quick Indian-style dal, or add them to minestrone soup in the last few minutes of cooking. The key point is to rinse them thoroughly. Open the can, pour the contents into a strainer or colander, and run cold water over them for 20 to 30 seconds while stirring with your hand. This removes the excess starch and oligosaccharides from the canning liquid and improves both digestibility and flavor. As with other canned beans, look for no salt added or low sodium versions when possible, and apply the same considerations about BPA-free liners if that's a priority for you. Canned lentils and chickpeas may not be as widely available as canned black beans or kidney beans in some stores, but they're increasingly common, and they're absolutely worth seeking out for the convenience and digestive benefits. Before we wrap up, it's worth putting all of this into context. Are canned beans healthy compared to cooking dried beans from scratch? Yes, absolutely. Multiple studies, including a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials looking at pulse consumption, have found that eating beans and other pulses is associated with improved cholesterol levels. Specifically, this research found significant reductions in LDL cholesterol when people incorporated beans into their diets at amounts around 130 grams per day. Observational studies on cardiovascular disease risk have been more mixed, but they generally show neutral to favorable associations as bean intake increases. Whether you get those benefits from dried beans you cook yourself or from canned beans you heat up doesn't matter nearly as much as whether you're eating beans regularly in the first place. The main nutritional trade-off is sodium, and as we've covered extensively, that's something you can manage by choosing no salt-added versions or by draining and rinsing. One question people often ask is whether rinsing beans washes away nutrients. The answer is that rinsing primarily removes sodium from the canning liquid, and the protein and fiber remain in the beans themselves. Water-soluble vitamins can be present in the liquid, but in relatively small amounts, and for most people eating a varied diet, the loss from a quick rinse is not nutritionally significant. It's a worthwhile trade-off to reduce sodium. Another common concern is whether the dates on cans matter for safety. Best buy or use by dates on canned goods are generally about quality, not safety. For low-acid foods like beans, the USDA notes that properly stored cans can maintain best quality for 2 to 5 years. After that, quality starts to decline, but the food doesn't suddenly become unsafe as long as the can remains undamaged and stored properly. If a can is bulging, rusted through, badly dented, or has been exposed to extreme conditions, then you should discard it regardless of the date. But an undamaged can, that's a few months past, the printed date is usually fine. Trust your inspection over the date. What you've learned today gives you the tools to shop smarter and protect your family's health. Those 5 types to avoid: damaged or compromised cans, improperly home-canned beans, beans exposed to temperature extremes or flooding, sweetened beans loaded with sugar and sodium, and high-sodium beans when better options exist. These are all avoidable with a little knowledge and attention. And the 2 types you can trust, no salt-added beans in water and well-rinsed canned lentils and chickpeas, these give you all the convenience and nutrition of canned beans without the risks. Check your pantry today, inspect those cans, and make the switch where needed.